Hello, everyone. Welcome to our session. And it's our great pleasure to present our ongoing IES project with all of you. This presentation is entitled Immersive Dialogue Approaches to Cultivating Civic Reasoning. And just want to give you a brief outline of today's session. We will do a quick introduction of this project and provide some rationales for the instructional design. And then we would like to take you to the journey of our history unit that we are currently implementing in 4th and 5th grade elementary classrooms in the United States. And then we will present some of our current findings and followed by Q&A. We would appreciate if you can leave your questions toward the end of our presentation, but we are monitoring the chat. And if you have questions, feel free to just post your questions, responses, or reflections in the chat. And one of us will be monitoring. And if we see it necessary to address those questions, we will stop to talk about those. And let me first start by introducing my research team. I have two wonderful, excellent collaborators, Dr. Michael Glassman. He is a developmental psychologist and an educational psychologist in our program. And he has expertise in technology education, the use of technology in classrooms. And Dr. Eric Anderman, he is a motivation researcher, and he has expertise in assessment and measurement. He's our assessment leader on this team and a dear colleague of mine in the program of educational psychology. And my expertise lies in instructional design, in collaborative learning, in teacher collaboration, in English language art and social studies classrooms. And we have wonderful graduate students and undergraduate students. Right now, we have a total of 16 people on the team, and we are very proud to be working with them. So the purpose of this project is to iteratively develop a year-long civic reasoning, civic learning curriculum in elementary social studies classrooms to promote students' digital citizenship, their civic reasoning, their interpersonal competencies, and academic achievement. And there are several reasons why we initiated this project. For this presentation, I will highlight two major reasons. The first reason is the prevalence in the use of technology in elementary schools. If you look at these statistics, it may not be surprising to you that the majority of schools nowadays are using technology in their normal instructions. And if you look at grade 4 public school students' use of internet at home, 81% or above are using, they have internet access and have a computer or a laptop, tablet at home. And these statistics are based on the report from 2019. Thanks to the pandemic, the prevalence of technology use has only been increasing and not decreasing over this past few years. And the second reason is that about 24% of grade A students, they've only performed at or above proficient level on civic achievement. And this is based on NAEP report in 2018. And if we look at social studies teachers' self-efficacy for teaching history and social studies in public schools, only 1 in 5 teachers feel competent in teaching these subjects. And so we've been thinking why, given the prevalence of technology use and the importance of social studies topics, why aren't our teachers equipped to educate students in deep learning in this area, social studies? So we want to take a social constructive approach and a collective approach to create a motivated and intellectually engaging environment for both teachers and students in elementary schools. And Carol Lee published a research brief with other colleagues along with the National Academy of Education. And we are following their call to develop a social studies curriculum that is not focusing on the subject of I, and instead is focusing on the subject of we. And we do not encourage students to compare them with others. Instead, they're removing that notion of I versus other or you versus others and look at we as a whole. And we also want to take a social justice perspective, purposefully selecting some learning materials that will raise the voice of some underrepresented populations, such as Native Americans. We also hope that this curriculum can encourage students to take social actions to be a more responsible, accountable citizens in their social communities. So what do we mean by a social constructive approach? This theory of change explains that. We are designing this curriculum such that the classrooms are set up with provocative social issues, civic issues, and in a very collaborative and egalitarian social structure. And with this setup, students are experiencing social conflicts with each other by noticing that everyone could have different opinions and background understandings of a social issue. And through the process of resolving the cognitive conflicts and the social conflicts, we anticipate students' interpersonal competencies and epistemic competencies to develop across time. And to manifest the social constructive approach, we design 4 units, and each unit follows this 10-day structure. On day 1 and day 2, we expose students with an interesting text. It's mostly fiction, and students will read about the fiction that will bring up an important and controversial or provocative social issues. And on day 3, students will gather in small groups to talk about the issues. And that's when they start experiencing cognitive and social conflicts. And on day 8, from day 4 to day 8, students will be exposed to multiple perspectives through reading, through discussions, and most important of all, through an activity that we call immersive learning. And Dr. Michael Glassman will talk about what we mean by immersive learning in the next slide. And after multiple days of exposure to multiple perspectives, students will then gather together on day 9 to talk to their small group peers and try to resolve the conflict again. And on day 10, they will individually write an argumentative essay with an integrated perspective. Just want to briefly talk about where we are right now. This is a 4-year project, and in year 1 and year 2, which is 2020, 21, and then 22 this year, we are scheduled to do iterative development of our units. In the first year, we worked with 4 teachers in 5th and 4th grade classrooms. And this year, we are working with 8 teachers in both grade levels. Next year is a very exciting year for us. We will formally implement the 1-year curriculum in a total of 20 classrooms, 10 DCL classes, experimental classes, and 10 business as usual classrooms. And for this presentation, we want to focus on two important instructional approaches that we developed to stimulate civic reasoning, in immersive learning and dialogic instruction. And so Michael will be up to talk about immersive learning. Michael?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so immersive learning, you're hearing that, and what does it mean? Recently, immersive learning has sort of like been applied to the idea of not only virtual reality, but headset virtual reality. But actually, that's very technologically oriented, but actually immersive learning and the immersive learning we're trying to promote in this study is much more a mixture of curriculum and how you do curriculum and technology. That technology offers the opportunities, but, and this is sort of based on previous research we've done also, you can't get something like immersive learning, you can't get something like collaboration simply through the technology. There has to be a strong curriculum component. You can actually trace immersive learning back a century, long before technology, that I would say one of the beginnings of it was at the Moscow Art Theater in Russia and Soviet Union in the 1920s. And as you may have seen in our original model of change, and a lot of in our collaboration, we rely a lot on Vygotsky's ideas and Vygotsky's thinking. And one of the things that's becoming more apparent over the last few years, and new research, archival research that's coming out, is that Vygotsky was pretty much was well influenced by what was happening at the Moscow Art Theater and through the work of Konstantin Stanislavski at the time. But we didn't actually start out with that when we did this, when we developed this curriculum. We were really focused on the idea of collaboration. You know, when we first started talking about this grant, what we wanted to do was we wanted to create these sort of discussions that were really collaborative discussions, that weren't just like sort of paint by the number discussions about things, and this is what I should say, but that had both an affective component and a strong social component. So really combining the cognitive, the social, and the emotional within the discussions within schools, which as we started working, we began to realize can be really hard to do. So we did the first unit of the first year, and there were a couple of people on our research team who were getting really frustrated with their class because the students didn't seem really that engaged with the material, and discussions did not seem really collaborative in any way. And they're discussing it constantly, and it's really interesting. Eric Raymond wrote like this really classic article in Technological Innovation called The Cathedral and the Bazaar. And in it, he had said that the crux of innovation, what pushes innovation forward, is a itch that you can't scratch. And that's sort of what happened with the members of our research team. So a lot of this came from the members of our research team. It didn't really come directly from us. Coming back and saying and discussing among themselves, you know, we've got to be able to do something. We've got to get stronger levels of collaboration. And they get together, and it's really funny because they get together every Sunday, some of the members of the research team, and play the role-playing game Dungeons and Dragons. And as they're playing Dungeons and Dragons and they're coming back and they're really into the game, every time there was a break, they'd say, how can we get the students more involved in this? You know, how can we get them to collaborate more? And I don't know when they came to the conclusion that the idea of, you know, we come every Sunday and we love doing this, and we talk about this all the time. Can we get this sort of type of atmosphere among these students? And, you know, they came to us and they said, hey, this is something, you know, we'd like to develop. And we started working with them and developing them and sort of meeting them and sort of beta testing the stuff and bringing other issues of from these type of collaboration and from this type of cooperation and from this type of like caring about each other into it. Some of it from like the sociologist, Colombian sociologist Orlando Falls-Borda, who talks about the need, if you're going to really understand people and you're really going to be engaged and involved with people, with issues, you have to like, he put it in a very like eloquent way, you have to like play their games with them, you have to swim in their streams with them. So the students started talking about, our research team started talking about, okay, how can we develop this atmosphere? And many of them had already been working with technology, and they wanted to use some of the technology, but we were really restricted to the technologies that were already in the classroom. And you're going to get some of this in a video that is about to follow. That we use these technologies and these very basic technologies that are available to the classrooms we were working with, but really any classroom, to really extend the realities of the students so that they are sort of like, to put it in Orlando Falls-Borda's terms, they really are sort of swimming in the same streams as those that they're studying, and they're really playing the games with those that they're studying. And you'll get a chance to see in the next video how they do that, how they did that, and how they were able to do that. And you know, we were looking for what to call this, and you know, and we thought, and actually it was Tzu Young who came up with the idea of like immersive learning. And at first we're going, no, because too many people are going to think it's virtual reality. But then it really is kind of augmented reality, and it really is more immersive than a lot of the virtual reality, educational virtual reality stuff that is done. So we were developing a curriculum where the students sort of shared in an interconnected way among themselves, like this universe, sort of this shared universe. So it wasn't this abstract idea that like they were commenting on. A lot of times when you do history and when you do really any subject, you have this abstract idea that these abstract ideas, these abstract facts, these abstract things that you're sort of commenting on and you sort of remove from them. And that especially didn't work for the collaborative arguments we wanted to really promote, but that they were sort of involved in like this sort of action-oriented approach to understanding what was going on, that it was the actions and that was driving them, and the actions were giving them a better sort of social understanding of what was happening and a better understanding of social reality. So we wanted them to do, and sort of creating, moving almost the way the students were talking about this in terms of collaboration, from the way the students were experiencing this. Orlando Falls-Borda has a great word, vivencia, for like life experience and how you experience it, and the way the students were experiencing it, and moving it away from sort of like this almost like the commenting on what happened to really being engaged, and from an affective component and from a almost social component, along with a cognitive component, really feeling what's happening. And sort of a way to put it is a move from sort of a social capital, a cultural capital view of what they were studying, like this is how you're studying, this is what you're supposed to say, to an almost social capital view or social capital perspective that sort of then we were hoping, and actually I think have crept into the ability to collaborate and talk with each other and seeing different ideas and sharing different perspectives. I think I'm out of time, and I think we're ready to see the video, because some of the people who helped create this put together this video as sort of seeing what they did in the process that we did, so you can have some idea as we move through.
Our project curricular units consist of 10-day lessons in which students collaborate and discuss pros and cons as small groups engaged in tasks, cooperating to come up with the best solutions for the given problems. We decided to approach curriculum development from the active, participatory perspective. As we look to develop an immersive or participatory experience for the students, we incorporated some of the technologies that were already a focus of our grant. We wanted to make this experience practical for educators, using technological affordances already available in many classrooms to augment the students' learning experiences and give them a better understanding and greater empathy of the times and the people they were studying. We looked to use available classroom technologies, such as Google Slides, to bring the students into the historical moment. One of the first things we were looking to accomplish was to establish some level of commitment to this new reality we wanted to create for them. This, we believed, includes an effective, almost theatrical component. We wanted students to start with the proverbial chill down the back of their neck, so we invited them to travel in time. Once the students were emotionally ready for a new reality, which is something extremely important yet often ignored in immersive learning, we wanted to take them into a new extended reality, one that was meaningful, one that was connected to everyday living and yet was different from their experiences. So our team members created vivid drawings of that historical period. Once we established the setting as a part of new reality, we want to start building a narrative for the students that could draw them in, make them feel like they were part of the story, actually living the history they were studying. And this is an important aspect of our curriculum design, where students learn in virtual settings, being put into different people's shoes. In so doing, they learn how to understand the perspectives of the others through their own actions. We intentionally align the focus of curriculum to help students understand multifaceted aspects of society, the interdependent nature of social systems, complex composition of a variety of people who have different interests, identities, needs, and disposition. To help them realize their capacity and potential as citizens, we look to start with action, following the lead of theories such as Vygotsky, asking them to engage in actions which again were relevant to them, but also very different. For example, to pick a job, or pick a pet, or to live and cook and associate in their own village. Starting with such seemingly small and routine-based actions, we try to help students recognize how actions are part of tasks, which themselves are part of the larger through action of life experience, helping them to develop as proactive but discerning citizens. So as you can see in this slide, students could choose the type of plants and animals they wanted to cultivate, as well as pick the name for their dog and the type of occupation that the character could have. Once setting and action had been established, we look to push the narrative forward so they could participate in a difficult, problematized history. We wanted to put this comfortable life they established in jeopardy, as it was for Native Americans, forcing them to accept treaties and the establishment of the Indian Resettlement Act. The students had to deal with the loss associated with these larger historical issues, moving in the opposite direction by setting the larger motivation and then letting them navigate tasks and engage in actions. So as you can see, the messenger delivered an important message for the students, which continued the narrative for the students. And we wanted to make sure that such turns of events are almost theatrical in nature. So we made sure that there is a very high quality audio that accompanies each of these events. With these new demands, students had to make difficult choices. They revisited their previous choices and had to navigate this loss. We did not tell them what they would lose. These were choices they would have to make and emotionally come to terms with. But these choices became a new and necessary part of this new reality. So as you can see, students have to get rid of one type of animals and plants that they were cultivating. They had to share housing, and they had to get rid of some of their dogs because they were taken away. Again, they were introduced to the Indian Removal Act and kind of had to go through the whole experience of relocating once their land and their belongings were taken. Now we wanted to bring the students back into the current times dealing with how the narrative continued to play out and understanding that history is very much a connected web of actions and consequences. And again, we wanted to start with an affective moment. Here we introduced the students to the idea that time changes things, but the time doesn't heal, so the narrative continues. We created a reality for the students where they continue to deal with the same issues, but in 2016, focusing on the idea that history is not only information, it is emotions and interpersonal relationships spreading back years. We hope that students do not only think smart, but also feel empathetic toward and understanding of others. We asked each of the student groups to join an activist family preparing to demonstrate against the pipeline that was going to be built on their land. Here, we asked students to help the protesters contribute to their cause. They could choose to help Aslan's family prepare food and water for the protesters, or they could help Lauren's family prepare the paint for water warriors. Again, we relied on the power of activity, with which students practice getting involved in necessary actions and behaviors for their communities. As you can see, the major strength of this approach is in that all activities are personalized and aim at helping students experience history through immersive, augmented experiences.
Okay. So this is our design and involvement with the immersive learning activities. And now I want to introduce another key component of the unit.
Our project,
it's called Dialogic Instruction. And like Michael said, when students are when they first gather together in small groups to talk about the critical issues that immigrants experience or the critical issues that Native Americans experienced, one struggle that they had and we had was these issues seemed very remote from students' personal experience. They could not relate, and the discussion was not personally relevant. And by including in this immersive learning activity, we found out that students were more able to make that connection, even though they were not they did not share that social identity. They can relate to those struggles and experiences and bring those social emotional experiences into dialogic instruction when they discuss about these controversial issues with their peers. This dialogic instruction is actually based on our existing project called Collaborative Social Reasoning. It's a small group instructional approach where students with different gender, ethnicity, and academic social abilities, they gather together to talk about a central issue as arise from a fiction story. And the social structure of this instructional approach is egalitarian. Every student plays equal important role and they have the equal footing to participate. And the knowledge is distributed among students and ideas are built upon each other's in an argumentative way. And again, the discourse is fostered by the instructional text that we provide to them, and it's built upon the immersive learning activities, the social emotional activities that experiences that they had in the previous days. So this is just a slideshow of our publications, recent publications related to collaborative social reasoning. We have found the positive effects of CSR on students' social reasoning, their academic and social vocabulary, their interpersonal competencies. And we also have a recent publication that focuses on the theoretical concepts underlying CSR. And now I want to present two testimonies from our collaborating teachers. The first one came from a fourth grade teacher.
In a few sentences, tell us how the digital civic learning curriculum as a whole has impacted your students' civic and social studies learning.
Okay, so being involved in these units transforms the way that kids think about history. Instead of being made to memorize names of people and dates and events, they are thinking about and talking about history at a much deeper level. And again, it's through that conversation that I feel like they're getting a deeper understanding of history in general and formulating more of a love for history and understanding what happened in the past. By researching events and analyzing text and participating in interactive experiences, the kids are able to look at historical events and individuals through multiple perspectives and formulate their own opinions on issues that have shaped the United States and, more specifically for our fourth grade curriculum, have shaped Ohio. And when we give the kids these opportunities to share opinions with others, I feel like we are giving them a voice that they can use to talk about what they're learning. And by discussing multiple perspectives and giving them time to have these deeper conversations, we're developing a confidence in these kids and allowing them to be a changing force, not just in our school, but also throughout the community as a whole.
In a few
Here's another teacher's testimony.
This unit had, all 3 units so far this year has had a great impact on my students. I've noticed so much improvement in a lot of different areas. One major impact I've noticed is the students are more empathetic to other cultures that may be different than theirs. They're learning about different cultures, and so they're able to understand some of the challenges that others may feel based on their cultures and traditions. Another major impact that I've seen is them being able to express their own opinions and own ideas, and even be able to listen to other people's opinions that may be different from theirs. The opposing ideas don't stress them out. They're okay to listen. They don't argue about it. They're showing each other's viewpoints. And even being able to put it into thoughts has changed from the beginning of the units, even into the beginning of the year. Starting these units has shown that these kids are able to take their ideas, put it down in thoughts, and it's okay to revise their thoughts. At the end of the unit that we just completed, which is the 3rd out of the 4, they didn't struggle to get their thoughts out, whereas at the beginning, they were struggling. They were asking, what do I write? And now they are able to put their thoughts out. And at some of them, it's like, I have more to write, even in the time that we gave them. So I've seen a huge increase in impact on students, both empathetic wise and being able to express their opinions and see different viewpoints. And it's a great experience so far.
All right, these are great testimonies. We have been enjoying working, collaborating with these teachers so much that we also learn a lot from these teachers. And Connie, I saw your chat. I'm gonna post those citations of CSRs in the chat in a minute. I realized that I can't really type when I present a video because the video would pause if I go back and type in the chat. So I will do that soon. Now,
this unit.
Before we jump into the next topic, which will lead you to the journey of our history unit and looking at some authentic data that we just collected from the field. I want to pause and ask if there's any questions, comments, reflections so far. Okay, then let's start with this next section. And again, if you have questions, feel free to post them in the chat. We selected a fiction story. This book is called Native American Heroes. And we focus on one of the heroes whose name is Tecumseh. And we picked this hero's story because he is the leader of the Shawnee tribe. And Shawnee was originally based in Ohio. We have a lot of places that are named after Shawnee, and we have students who are readily able to make that connections as soon as they saw the names. And so we deliberately choose this story to help students build that personal connections with their social local communities. And in this presentation, we start this journey at the year of 1812, when there was a war between Americans and the British Army. And the Native Americans at the time had to pick a stand and join the war. And Tecumseh, as the leader of the Shawnee tribe, he decided to partner with the British Army because the Americans did not give Native Americans a fair treaties. And Tecumseh was trying to protect his tribe and other Native American nations at the time. And so they fought, and unfortunately, Tecumseh passed away in the battle because the General Proctor, the general from the British Army, fled away and left Tecumseh alone in the field. And so when students learned about this historical moment, we created a scenario where there was a messenger coming to the village and announced this sad news. And so students read this following message and knew that Tecumseh was left alone and to be killed. And this resulted in issues with many Shawnee tribes, leading to many of them losing their unity and home. And so students had a lot of emotional conversations about this with the teacher in the classroom, mainly in the whole class discussions setting. And after that, we introduced an immersive learning activity where students were asked to consider which animal, which plants, and that they have to let go because now their lands are taken away. And that's the consequence of Tecumseh's death. And here is a small group discussion of students trying to decide what animals and plants that they have to remove.
So let's keep the cattle because you have the cattle drop, and let's eliminate the chicken.
I think we should keep the chicken.
No one had a chicken.
But I think we should get the chicken because because chickens are lighter and they're gonna be easy to take.
Okay. So let's destroy the cattle and let's feed the chicken.
Yes.
And do you want to keep the squash, beans, and corn?
Well, we can only choose one fruit. Vegetable. So let's decide if we would want.
I was the corn one.
Yeah.
We'll do corn.
Because the corn has sweet, sour, salty, and bitter, and it has a lot of flavors to it. So
Yeah.
I think keep the corn.
Mhm. Agreed.
So we keep this one.
So then we get rid of cattle.
Don't forget fish is in there, guys. Don't forget the fish. If you don't need any land for fish, forget about it.
So we should keep the swamp for the fishermen.
Should we keep it or no? So between the fish.
I think that we should keep it because
We could also do fish. We could add some fish instead too.
Gonna stop the video here. So from this video, you can see that students were really struggling in determining what animals, what plants or crops that they have to lose. It was a very emotional decision, a tough decision to make. And they knew that they were traveling with the Shawnee tribe back in this 1812 period, and trying to help the tribe decide how they should restructure their tribe in order to survive. Michael, do you have anything to add before we move to the next page? You're muted.
Not right now, other than like to really emphasize the emphasis on having the students engaged in everyday life and having the students engaged in actions, which I think is like a really strong part of this type of curriculum intervention.
Great. Right. Let me move on, and my collaborators will monitor the chat while we talk about the other part. So now students experience what happened in the 1912, and the time warp is moving them back to 2016. It's related to an issue in Standing Rock. In 2016, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers approves a Dakota pipeline project to build a pipeline from North Dakota to Southern Illinois to transport oil. And the consequence of this pipeline building is that it could potentially pollute the water around the Native Americans reservations. And so Native American nations, they gathered together in 2016, and still this is an ongoing event right now to protect their water, to protect their lands. And so during this unit, we help students understand from Native Americans' perspectives of why they want to do the protest. And they were in this immersive learning activity, they learned about how to make signs to help with the protest. And they learned the potential consequences of the pipeline, how that could potentially destroy the sacred burial sites, prayer sites, or cultural artifacts of the Standing Rock Sioux tribe. And the leak of the oil could potentially contaminate the water. But we also expose students to another perspective, another aspect of this Dakota Access Pipeline debate, which is that if this pipeline can be successfully built, the US government's argument is if this can help with the economy, it could add more jobs and add more money to the government and to the US. And so oh, sorry, I forgot that this is a video. So let's just listen to students' conversations about the government sides of the debate.
There is an economic impact. We know economic means money. Okay. So if the pipeline happens, it will add 8,000 or 12,000 construction jobs.
Wow! My God, that is a lot.
The pipeline will create $156 million in sales and income tax to help the state and local government.
Actually, that's a lot of money.
That is a lot of money.
That's too much. But it's a lot. That's too much.
Okay, I'm glad that I'm glad that you said it doesn't change my mind. You're secretary.
Either life and death or money.
Okay.
Life is more important.
Life is more important.
I don't know if you can hear the last few sentences from the students. One student, after hearing this economic argument, he said, well, life is still important, more important than money. Okay, so after exposing the pros and cons of that pipeline debate, students are now traveling back to 2012 2022. And they were told that there's another pipeline that is going to be built on Native Americans' land in Minnesota. And this is an actual event. And they were told that their friends didn't know, and they didn't have a chance to travel back in time. And so they didn't understand the pros and cons. And in this CSR discussion, they are going to help their friends understand different reasons why some people support the pipelines and some people do not, and what advice that they would give. So we are going to show you two videos. Each of them is about 1 minute long, about what students think about this critical issue.
Something that happened earlier in history, like plantations, like slave owners. History can repeat itself. History can repeat itself. It could start up. It could it's already happening, but it could turn into a whole war in I don't know, months. Okay, I disagree with you that it could turn into a war. Yeah, sort of. Enough peace for that not to happen. I do think, however, that the Native Americans are being treated unfairly and that people need to understand what they're going through more to really try and have the sympathy for them and the empathy. You're right.
Yeah. And here is another discussion from another classroom.
I would say, hey, how would you like to feel if somebody dug into your place where your house is instead of where they were supposed to do it? They chose their own place and chose your place to the construction workers. And then I would say, if you want to keep your place clean, couldn't you keep the Native Americans' place clean too? The Native Americans did nothing to them, and they're literally just doing that. Just because they have better land and better water, that doesn't mean you have to dig in somebody else's houses or something.
Right, but if you think about the other side of that, they're not building the pipeline to be bad people. They're building to have safer reasons.
And
they're having a safer reasons to get the oil to transfer. Because if they travel it on a truck, the truck would just crash, and then all that oil would be wasted. And then they would have to go get another truck and go get more oil, and still have a risk of the car crashing.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
I know that they're doing it.
All right. The discussion was very productive, and students were very into it. And multiple perspectives, the sense of empathy, perspective taking, were all what we heard from these conversations. And if you observe something that we did not observe from these video clips, feel free to share your thoughts in the chat.
I would say something.
Right. And now we will share some of our current findings with you, and Dr. Eric Enderman will be covering this part.
Thanks. Hi, everybody. So this project, we collect enormous amounts of data, and the diversity of types of data that we collect are, this is greater than in any other research I've ever been involved with in my career. And so just for about a couple of minutes, I just want to tell you a little bit about the kinds of data we are collecting and just some of our initial analyses that we have done. So this is from years 1 and 2. We do classroom observations during all the lessons. There are focus group interviews that are conducted at various time points with the teachers and with some of the students. There are teacher and student interviews at various time points. We do surveys, questionnaires at the beginning, and we have multiple very short questionnaires, particularly to track student engagement throughout the units. We have teacher ratings of the students. So the teachers in each classroom provide ratings of each student on a number of indicators. all of the discussions that the students have, we record all of those. So we have all of the discussions of the video recordings, and the students also engage in online discussions where they're actually having conversations through text online, and we have all of that we collect. And then a big part of this is the student essays that were mentioned earlier. Students write argumentative essays at various time points, and we look at how their ability to look at different perspectives and multiple perspectives changes as they go through these units. You can go on to the next. So just going to share a couple of these really quickly with you. We're just getting into the data because we're just in year 2 now, and we're so involved in being in the classrooms. But one of the studies we've done so far, we've looked at civic reasoning and the relationship of that to the children's decision making. So in this particular study, I'm not going to go through all the details of it. I'm just going to give you some bare bones information of what we did and what we found, but glad to share more with any of you during the discussion or afterward over email or in additional conversations. So in this particular study, we looked at pre-post changes in civic reasoning and decision making using the argumentative essay task that the children completed. So as you may recall, the argumentative essay, I don't know if we mentioned this, but when the students write these essays, it's based on a short video that they see and a short text that they read. So one of the essays that they wrote last year was on immigration at the beginning of the year, and then another one at the end of the year dealt with some issues related to the costs and benefits of technology. So the essays are all written, and then they are blindly scored, and we have a whole system for that. We have a holistic scoring system, and they're scored in terms of students' reasoning about citizenship, about ethics of care, which is really their ability to acknowledge each other's or society's responsibilities to address various needs, and argumentation, their ability to argue and to look at counter arguments. And what we found was that looking at the ratings, comparing the pre to the post, the ethics of care, students were more likely in the post essay to include ethics of care in their essays, discussions of that. For citizenship, the proportion of students holding no perspective or a justice-oriented perspective decreased, whereas the proportion of students holding personally responsible or participatory citizenship increased. So their conceptual thinking, the level of thinking that they were able to do about citizenship and what it means to be a citizen changed qualitatively during the year. And for the argument and counter-argument integration, that they were more likely to be able to do that at the post-test than at the pre-test. You can go on to the next one. We also are very concerned about feasibility. I'm sure a lot of you are. IES is very concerned about this, and it's an important thing to be concerned about. They're investing a lot of money in this, so is this feasible? So we've been doing quite a bit of work on feasibility. And just briefly, I'm not going to read this whole slide to you, but we've been assessing feasibility through a number of different data sources, particularly through the interviews and through the focus groups. And overall, what we've been finding is that people are, both the students and the teachers are very accepting of the curriculum. They really like it, but as is supposed to happen in an iterative grant, we have identified some issues and some things that we need to do that we are changing to make things better. So in terms of relevance, we look at whether students find these issues to be relevant to them, and they do, and the teachers report that, and you can see it from the children's engagement as well, and we have data to support that. Adjusting to conflict, students varied in this in terms of the different perspectives that they shared. Some were willing to do this a little bit more than others. In terms of the actual modalities of the different types of dialogue and the different types of technology, we basically identified that it's working well, but there are some things that we needed to work on. In particular, point out that the teachers found it a little complicated to deal with all the multiple tools that were available and the multiple various learning management systems and software applications and things out there. And I think we learned that we had to simplify that and streamline it a little bit. And you go on to the next one. And the last one I'll share just briefly is we wanted to look at how this immersivity, the immersive units that Dr. Glassman talked about before, how those were working. So last year we had 3 units, one on immigration, one on Native Americans, and one on food insecurity. We had 87 students who were participating, who had parental permission, consent to participate. And during the year, each unit, as we talked about before, became more immersive. So the immersivity changed over time. So these data are based on interviews with all the teachers from last year after each of the units. And just briefly, what we did was, after the interviews were completed, we developed a coding scheme. The actual teacher utterances were the units of analysis. And this was comparing the first unit to the third unit. So the least immersive to the most immersive. And short story, what we found was that teachers reported, I'm going to say significant, but increases in students' local and global awareness of social issues, increases in networking agency. What that means is students were more likely to use technology to share their beliefs. The kids became more facile with using the technology for the purposes related to social studies and civic learning. Students' technical skills definitely improved. They were, in particular, the teachers said, definitely able to navigate the vast number of online resources much better. Critical perspectives also improved their ability to look at alternate points of view, although only 3 of the 4 teachers reported that. One of them didn't. And then in terms of political activism, only 2 of the 4 teachers even talked about this. And political activism is things like for the kids talking about contacting the local government about social issues. So only 2 of the 4 mentioned it, and only 1 of those 2 talked about it increasing. So again, very, very helpful to us as we continue developing this for our larger rollout next year. And we're going to really pause. We know we presented with you a lot of information, and we're very grateful for you all listening. And we want to just open it up now for discussion, participation. There were some questions in the chat, so please feel free to turn your sound on, and you can turn your video on if you want, but we'd love to engage in some discussion with you about this. Thank you.
Maybe we can start with Dr. Jesse Senecol's question about whether or not school districts would have pushed back on us teaching students diverse perspectives. And that is a very good question. So I can provide some of my responses, and Michael and Eric, feel free to jump in. One of the approaches that we do in this project is to incorporate the units that we develop into schools' existing curriculum. And we consult the Common Core standards, making sure that our units can help teachers and the school meet their Common Core standards. And so when there are issues coming up regarding so what do students learn from this unit, and how is this unit benefiting students, we have the school's backup and the Common Core standards as a backup to show parents that these are typical topics that teachers and schools will incorporate in the social studies curriculum to help students think and learn better?
One of the things I'll add is that I don't know if we talked about before, but we're doing this in two strikingly different school districts. One is a lower socioeconomic status for the most part. One is much more upper SES, vastly different student populations, vastly different parents, different family situations. But we're doing the same thing in both of these communities, which is very, very, it's challenging at times, but very, very informative, because the kids are having these same discussions in fourth grade in different schools in highly different communities that really, in terms of Ohio, really represent a lot of the diversity in this state.
Yeah, and I also want to say we did run into this specifically in the beginning of the year, and teachers were worried also, because this was a time when a lot of this was really blowing up, and teachers were worried about like being put on lists and things like that. And we made the conscious decision not to be reactive, not to say, oh, we got to be careful. Instead, and I have to really give props to Young for this, we wrote these letters to the parents who were upset and really explained in detail why we were doing this and what this meant. And I don't know if they just gave up or that we convinced them, but because we weren't reactive, we were able to move forward. The other issue with it is that the kids were really enjoying this. The kids were really enjoying engaging in these activities. And I mean, many of you parents, if your kid's happy, it's really hard to complain about something. So I think the engaging nature of the curriculum helped, but we did make the conscious effort at the beginning of the year not to be reactive, even though this was all exploding together.
And in my area in particular is motivation and engagement, and there's lots of ways to measure that. But when a child says, "Oh, can't we do more about the Native Americans?" That's like, there's no better evidence than that this is being engaging. Emily?
Thank you. I'm glad you could see the hand, but I need to lower it. Okay, I have sort of a broad question, but I love Adrian's question in the chat too. So, but I'll go ahead and jump in and ask mine, because it's sort of similar to what Adrian's asking about with parallel processes. So, Shujung, you started by talking about sort of the theoretical framework, and I really loved this sort of notion of kind of the concept, if you will, that you're pushing for here, that kind of permeates, is trying to frame things around getting people to think about we rather than I versus others. And that seemed very powerful to me. So in my IES frame, I think all IES all the time, I'm thinking about the SEER principles, and I'm thinking about core components. And so it strikes me that the effort to create this thinking, this framework, is perhaps a core component of what you're doing and the program itself. So that's sort of like a question for you. Like, is that fair maybe to characterize it that way? Like, I always kind of challenge grantees on, well, if I walk in a classroom, like, how do I know it's happening, this thing you're developing and testing for feasibility? And so then what really struck me in thinking about that as a core component, I saw in the chat, maybe Eric or Michael, both of you were saying like, no, teachers aren't really supposed to be modeling certain things, and there are no specific STEM prompts for conversations. So like, how do you do this Vygotskian thing of scaffolding in sort of a more free form, flexible kind of way? Like, anyway, sorry, that was a very big question. So do you see where I'm going with this? Like,
yes,
is that a core component? And what are the things that are really driving that in what you're developing?
Well, if we're going to do I and we and say we want to concentrate on we really have to do that. We can't say we're going to do I and we and then say scaffolding, which is very much oftentimes an I sort of activity, or modeling, which is very much oftentimes a one-to-one activity. So central to this curriculum and to the project in general is the concept of collaboration. And it sort of speaks to I'm sorry, it was Adrian's question too, because he said, so does this go forward? And the basic principle is once we are able to collaborate, and once we are able to find sort of a collaborative pathway to understanding the world, that we get a lot out of it, that we understand that oh, this works. This is what's going to make our life better. This is going to make our life more worthwhile, and we want to do this more. We want to do this again. So in answer to Adrian's question, the assumption, and we don't know this, we just obviously started this, is that these collaborative skills, these perspective-taking skills, this willingness to look into others is going to stay at when they when they're successful with it, and when they enjoy the type of success they have with it, it's going to stay with them. And actually, I would make the argument, and probably a lot of people would argue against me, that it stays with them more because it's theirs. It's organic to them. It's who they are, than anything they learn from modeling or that they learn from scaffolding, which sort of is connected to the class rather than connected to who they are. So deep within what we're doing is this trust in the students and in the processes of collaboration, and that these are really, really meaningful as students. And when the students are successful, they will carry it with them. I mean, maybe you guys want to.
And I agree with all of that, but what we don't know is whether or not they will, if they encounter instructional practices in future grades that are very different than this, and that really approach history and civics in a very different way, if that will squash it out of them. And so that's something that is something that, I mean, I hadn't thought about it, but, it would be wonderful to follow these longitudinally. So Emily, keep that in mind when we send you a proposal. But I think for me, it's the longitudinal part is it's both what Michael said, it's do they naturally do it, but also how does what they have gained from this interact with their future experiences in other classrooms, like how history and social studies are taught in middle school and high school.
In one of the emerging components of our instruction approach is this norming and renorming process. And Michael and Eric, you can add more after I talk. So when we initially started the unit, we have a set of principles that we would like students to adopt when they are collaborating with peers in the classroom. And then we figure out that the norms and those rules have to be adapted to classrooms based on students' unique needs and their previous training. And this also applies to teachers. Our teachers are also in that process of learning. And so what we did this year that's different from last year was every now and then we would invite teacher and students to come together, either as a whole class discussion or in small groups, to reconsider what are the norms or rules that they would like to change or add all together. And these rules becomes theirs. These rules are not given by the researchers. And so the students really have that sense of ownership of the structure, the social structure that they are pursuing with others as a group. So this, again, going back to this notion of we versus others, I versus you, it's then it's we or us as a group pursuing a common goal together. And this goal can be adapted again and again throughout the entire unit based on everyone's needs.
Hi, I don't even know if I can really formulate this question clearly. This isn't the age group of children I usually study, but I think I loved everything you shared. I can't wait to go read some of the publications, but I'm wondering, particularly there was a part of the activities where you bring them back to the future, and it's this idea of like, it almost starts to look like collective action groups, right? Like, what are we gonna do about it? And you're talking about it from this perspective of it's we, but oftentimes, you know, they might not have the same goal. So you kind of think about this idea, even in our current, you know, public discourse and political lives and civic lives, of, you know, a lot of people actually exit that process. They don't engage because they don't share the goal. They may not engage or act because they still have a high degree of uncertainty. They want more information. You know, so I'm kind of curious. I loved watching the kids interacting, and there were only a couple of times, you know, where the video clips, which were brief, you know, had kids who seemed like they weren't as engaged as the other children in the group. And it just made me, I know you're focused on the we, and there's not sort of individual level scaffolding, but it makes me wonder, like, what's embedded in the process to help individuals who are in this sort of collective conversation now know how to behave procedurally. Like, what's the process? If I'm this kid who I don't share their goal, I'm in this group, my goal would be, my action would be nothing. Like, what do you do in that situation to help individuals know that it's not a black or white, we all join the group, we have the shared goal, period. And I think some of that, as you get into some of the subject matter that might be more controversial in some places, having kids understand to some extent that, yes, we're considering other people's perspectives, we're considering a range of actions, one of which is often inaction. It's the one that many people exercise. You know, how do I fit in this collaborative conversation?
So inaction's not really inaction. Inaction is a choice of action, right? Inaction is a choice of, I'm not going to do anything. I am going to be involved, I'm not be involved. And there are a bunch of different, and you can't really force somebody to be involved in something they're not interested in or they're not committed to, that they don't feel sometimes. And this is why the social emotional component of it is so important, that there has to be an affective aspect to what they're doing. And part of what we're attempting to do in the curriculum is sort of build this affective component. And we build this affective component through, we're trying to build this affective component through action, through the idea of, yeah, you have to make these decisions, or we're asking you to make these decisions. And the way we build up into asking them to make these decisions is we do give them these dogs. We do give them these, like, we do give them the choice of jobs that they have to take. And it's really interesting because the reason, like again, this actually came from the researchers, says it's not from us. The reason we include dogs is because we were in class and the kids were always posting pictures of dogs. So they were really, really into dogs. So they decided this is going to really make them emotionally committed, or this is going to make a lot of students who wouldn't otherwise be emotionally committed. So so these were the actions they took. And we're hoping that these actions, you know, lead to a sense of, yeah, I do it. There is an effective component to this. There is something I really care about. And I may not care about it in the same way that a student B cares about it, but I do care about it. So I want to try and work this problem out. So a real key component of this that I don't think you find in some other curriculums, which are much more cognitively oriented, is the idea of, yeah, there is an effective component to this there is something I want to accomplish. It's not just, I'm just not being asked to comment on this. This is actually something that has, even if it's at a level of, I don't want to give up my dog, you know, or I don't want to change my job. Or it was really funny in one of the classes, because they were losing houses, so people had to live together, and there were arguments over who gets to lose a house and who has to live together. Even at that level, at the action level, that this can sort of create this type of commitment among the students. Eric?
Yeah, and yes, and I also want to add that we think that selection of topics and materials really matter. At the beginning of our project, we struggled a lot with student engagement, because students seem to engage in the materials in the way that may make us feel like these issues are their issues, not our issues. And they don't see that personal relevance. So we spent months of time trying to build our instructional materials, the text and the questions, to make them more accessible to students at this grade 5 and grade 4 level, and to make them interesting and engaging to students. For example, we have a unit called food security versus food insecurity. And students at this age, they don't have that concrete concept of what's food security or insecurity means, even though some of them are experiencing that struggle in their neighborhood. And so Michael, he wrote a story all by himself, using grade 4 students' tone of language to illustrate a perspective from a child and how she saw her father struggling with the loss of job, and then now they are lacking food. And students really get it, because they can relate that to somebody else who are also struggling, or even to their personal experience, and they became more engaged. And so motivation, I think, is really key. That students need to be motivated and interested in the topics in order to be fully engaged. But we still recognize that sometimes there are variations in the level of engagement among students in the classroom. And so what we did in our units is to provide multiple modalities for kids to have their voice heard. Talking is great, but not every child is comfortable with talking in class, especially in a whole class setting. So we have whole group versus small group discussion. And not every children is comfortable with talking. And so we provide them with self-recording device opportunities and online discussion board. And based on these multiple modalities, we can hear almost every kid's opinions through different formats and in different lengths and in excitement. Yeah, Michael, Eric, do you want to add something?
No, I think you covered that. I see Emily's hand is up.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Emily.
Sorry, I'm so sorry. Finding. Can you hear me?
Now,
Yeah.
Sorry about that. I really have trouble finding the mute button here.
Oh.
So my question, okay, so this is actually very interesting because it's actually related to Jesse's question in the chat. Like, what's the goal here? You know, what are you trying to, what are you really looking to change, or what are you trying to have happen here? And so for me, I've always thought about your project as these are sort of, this is an instructional practice, right, for teaching social studies. And as sort of Adrian alluded to, like, we would hope that students would carry forward sort of these skills, you know, at sort of conflict resolution, argumentation, taking on multiple perspectives, talking about these things, planning civic action, as Jesse mentions. But I also just see it as like, I guess I always think of these things as potentially just good general things to be happening in the classroom to support all sorts of teaching and learning. Whether the topic is social studies or history, sure, great, but you would hope kids are taking away greater skills in sort of collaborating with others in the classroom, their peer group. So I'm going to put into the chat links to 2 old grants that we funded in this portfolio. One is a grant from 2009. It's a development and innovation project, just like yours. Gary Ladd was the PI. And the goal was to create this thing they were calling For Our Success. And it was for teachers to try to help kids learn how to work in small groups. You know, like that age-old problem of, I want the kids to work together in small groups. How do you organize it? What kind of strategies can you give teachers? It was a terrible failure. Okay. It was one of those interventions that just didn't really work out. The teachers didn't like it. It was too structured. It sounds like the opposite of what you're doing, where you give the teachers some freedom to sort of figure out how to set up these groups. The other project I wanted to point out to you was an exploration project that was initially led by, Philip Rodkin, who passed away during the course of the grant, but he worked with Scott Guest, who I believe is now at UVA. And it was studying classroom peer ecologies and looking at things like the role of friendships and popularity and cliques and, you know, sort of what does that all mean in classrooms, and do teachers have any control over that, and how does that support teaching and learning? And so one question I have for you is, like, in setting up these small groups, do you have anything to say about how the teachers do it? Or is this one of those, like, however they think that's going to go best? And how do you see sort of the little mini dynamics within those groups as sort of, what's your take on it, and how does it factor into this thing working or not?
Yeah, and I can start by sharing some of the feedback that we received from our collaborating teachers so far. One of the teachers, she really likes our project because she called this project interdisciplinary. And the reason why she called it this way is because this is not just about social studies. This project heavily incorporates English language arts skills. And there are some arguments that also touch on scientific knowledge. And so when our teachers have to teach multiple subjects during the day, this teacher really thinks that she benefits so much from it, because she can see that her kids are able to write an essay in a much better and argumentative format. She can see that students, when they talk in class, in other subject areas, they are able to use some of the talk moves that they develop from our project. And just want to share an anecdote experience that just happened these days. One of our teachers was approached by other teachers from her building inquiring about our project, and they want to know how they can get involved in our project, because they saw that the kids in our projects were so engaged and motivated to learn that they want their kids to benefit from it as well, if not this year, next year. So that demonstrates at least the local impact that we are making right at this point.
Yeah, just to talk about, like, so what's the goal? The goal really is collaboration. The idea is that if we can get these kids to collaborate, if we can get these kids to really listen to each other and learn from each other, and if these are good experiences, that they will follow through. I think it was Jay asked an interesting question. Now I'm trying to find it back in. About is it collective agency or is it like collaboration? And the answer to that is yes, because collective agency comes from collaboration. That this belief that if you, I'm not going to go deeply into like Samson and what he's saying, But if you believe people will listen to you and you can get something out of it and you start listening to people, yeah, that's what leads to collective agency. So at the core of what we're doing is still the same core that was at the core of our original grant, which is collaboration will lead to like really great things, including like social and emotional skills. It's interesting that you mentioned Gary Ladd's study 4R, because I just taught that for another class. And we were talking about why it failed. And 4R, they're doing it at Morningside. Is that the same thing they're doing at Morningside?
That's different thing. It's confusing. They have similar names.
Yeah, but the idea that you don't teach the social emotional skills so the students can do better in projects. You do the projects, and out of successful projects come those social emotional skills.
That's a cool theory of change point, right? It's like, what comes first? That's really important to emphasize here. That's cool.
Going back to the primary goals, I also think that one of the primary goals, at least I think it's true for all three of us, but I'll speak for myself, is just getting kids to be excited about civics and history. Civics and history, study after study, when you ask kids, what's the most boring subject you ever had to learn? And both of my kids growing up, they're both recently graduated from high school. Oh God, social studies. Oh, I hate social studies. And these kids are excited about this. And to me, that's an unbelievably important outcome, because we know in subjects like math and science, regardless of how well you do in it, people go on to further study and careers in math and science if they value it and they think it's important and interesting and useful. The same holds true for civics and social studies. And in this world of fake news and people believing anything they hear, I think a great outcome is just to have these kiddos at the end of 4th and 5th grade saying, history is cool. It's fun to learn about this, and there's important stuff, and our past is related to our present, and just to have them go out there that way.
I'm not sure how much time we have, but I want to make sure we address Joy Kennedy's question. It's interesting. I'm curious to know what you're doing with it. With your middle school and high school students. And I think in terms of toolkits, one of the deliverables of our project is to ultimately come up with a set of toolkits or materials to help teachers disseminate this knowledge, not just to their future teaching, but they can disseminate them to other teachers. Yeah, so I'm curious to know what you're doing. Joy, would you mind sharing a little bit of what your project is about?
Oh, not at all. It's actually very similar, which is, I'm just struck by all of the parallels. We're using Mission US, which is an online first-person role-playing game. So an immersive experience focused on different eras in US history. It's for an older age group, so mostly grades 5 through 10. But getting at a lot of these same kinds of experiences and decision making at a very local level to really encourage perspective taking. We're much less focused on the collaborative aspect of it and the social emotional aspect of it, which to some extent, I guess, makes some sense given the age range we're talking, but that's a really, given how critical social emotional skills are all along, but particularly in the elementary grades, it's a great extension to think about. But I was really struck by something you guys said about what happens to these kids when they go on to encounter teachers who don't think that sharing perspectives is important. So I'm really the possibility of this being a suite of things that a curricular instructor or designer can institute, across the elementary and middle school years, as a way to make sure that kids continue to get this sense of perspective as they approach social studies and civics is really interesting to me. So I think
Yeah, thank you.
Time, but thank you.
I will make sure to follow your work.
I'm sure you guys will be hearing from me in the not so distant future because I'm very interested in your measures.
Yes, we
Thank
should
you so
communicate. Thank you. And it seems that our time is up. Thank you so much for joining us. We truly enjoy this opportunity, and we hope to disseminate our findings in the near future.